We are talking Parasitic from 2012, written and directed by Timothy Martin. Now, Martin's background is actually in VFX, and it shows in this movie. It's a low-budget kind of creature feature movie, and it focuses on this kind of nightclub, like a stripper, kind of bar nightclub type place, and we have the kind of the staff there, you know, the bouncers, the kind of the dancers, the bar staff, etc., closing down for the night. But one of the members of the kind of the crew there eats some fish which has been kind of infected with this kind of alien parasite, and she starts to kind of feel ill, and ultimately kind of is overcome by this kind of parasite kind of creature which is kind of growing within her, and has kind of taken over her and has kind of ultimately kind of come out of her body. Now this parasite creature is able to turn kind of other humans into like zombie-like kind of creatures, and it is up to the dwindling members of the people trapped in this nightclub, which has been locked, to fight for their lives. What will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So let's discuss what I think works about this film. There's one thing that stands out that I would say really worked in this movie's favour, and that is the VFX. So as I mentioned, Martin, the director here, his background is in VFX, and it's the one area where I feel this movie really does kind of shine, especially considering the low budget here, because we get some fantastic kind of gooey kind of creature effects here, who you know, particularly coming from this one woman who is kind of infected with the main sort of parasite, and it's pretty well done, again, for the kind of the low budget. But we get some great practical, gooey, slimy VFX of this kind of alien creature kind of protruding from this woman, kind of infecting and stabbing, you know, these kind of tendrils into its other kind of victims and things like that. Various kind of like slimy, gooey kind of like creature, monster effects and stuff. So the VFX here, I think if you like the kind of the practical kind of like xenomorph kind of style effects, I mean, it's not quite obviously that good, but it's fairly good for a movie, certainly, which is otherwise clearly kind of quite low budget. The other thing I would say is, I mean, the story is relatively basic, but I think it's a serviceable kind of story. It is admittedly one of these typical kind of like horror movies where people are trapped in a building which doesn't seem to have fire exits. I see this quite a lot. Oh, we're trapped, we've been locked in, but you know, this building apparently doesn't have fire exits, whatever. But yeah, the story is kind of simple, but it's serviceable, and I think the tone of this movie, sort of taken kind of somewhat seriously, gives it an element of kind of danger, really. And I quite like the kind of this setup where we see this kind of like this meteor sort of coming to Earth, and ultimately the kind of the cause of it. And really, it's kind of like the parasite infects our kind of our main kind of woman, if you like, because it's been sort of eaten by infected food, and it's kind of like a little bit of like you are what you eat kind of thing there. You know, what you put in your body ultimately is going to kind of affect you. So there is a little bit of kind of that to it as well. And you know, this movie, from what I have read about it, is quite poorly reviewed. A lot of the people have commented on how bad the acting is, but I didn't think it was that bad, if I'm honest. I mean, it's kind of typical of what you'd see in a kind of a low budget movie, but I didn't think it was like distractingly awful. There is some issues with kind of the characters, which I think people are kind of, you know, confusing with bad acting, which I'll come on to. But I didn't actually think the acting was terrible. I mean, it's not brilliant, but it's fine for this kind of like, you know, B-movie style kind of film. You know, it's a relatively short film. It's quite kind of punchy. I think maybe this movie is harshly criticised for elements where I think it does okay in. But let's talk about what doesn't work in this movie. And here's where I feel this movie gets judged quite harshly. It really suffers with some technical elements here. Now, Martin, the director, as I've said, background in VFX, but I think the kind of the more technical elements of film production escapes him. Let me give you some more detail with that. So Let's talk about the sound first of all. So the sound mixing's awful. You know, we have what sounds to me like the audio has been picked up with kind of like a boom mic with the actors talking, but it sounds there's a lot of ambient noise that is picked up. The dialogue kind of sounds quite kind of like tinny and echoey at times. The audio mixing is quite bad. There's like, you know, for example, there's musical kind of cues that will drown out the kind of the dialogue and things. You know, the volume kind of shifts into kind of quite loud in some scenes to kind of quite quiet in the other. So, I mean, that's just the audio. There's also some quite choppy editing. For example, there's a sequence where our main woman who's kind of, you know, housing this alien is kind of birthing this kind of thing that's coming out of her throat, and we have like someone who's trying to kind of find her, and it just edits to like a 1 second shot of this, you know, woman struggling, and it's just like, oh, that edit was like, to have a 1 second shot of this woman going was just not, it was too like jarring in regards to some of the transitions here. So there's some dodgy kind of editing. Let's talk about cinematography. This movie takes place in a nightclub in the early hours of the morning, and it looks like it hasn't had any extra lighting in it. Now, you could argue it's at night, but obviously we are talking in an internal building here that would have lighting in it. It's always dark, this film. I mean, again, that's the one way you can sometimes hide like the VFX and stuff, and the VFX do look good, as I've said, but it's always kind of quite dark. It makes it for quite a kind of a, you know, hard to kind of see what's going on. You're constantly kind of like, everything's murky kind of looking. So it just doesn't look particularly kind of good. So that's just the technical elements. Let's talk about other elements here. The other major thing where I feel this movie goes wrong in is its work with its characters. Now, as I said, I think the actors have got a little bit of an unfair criticised. They've been unfairly criticised for bad acting, which I don't think it necessarily is. What I do think, however, is there's very little characterisation. There's actually quite a lot of dialogue in this movie, but there's very little characterisation. We really don't feel like we know any of the kind of the characters. The dialogue scenes, as I say, are quite often just banal dialogue. Which is kind of sometimes poorly kind of understood because of the kind of technical problems, and then also the characterization that we do get. A lot of our characters seem the same and somewhat unlikable, so we really don't feel like we get a kind of a depth of character here. The characters seem kind of interchangeable with one another. They don't really feel like they have a lot of kind of outstanding personality. There's one guy who's like more pervy than or something, but a lot of them are just kind of interchangeable. All the kind of the girls seem kind of quite flighty, kind of like, you know, stripper types, and they have a little bit of kind of like, I don't know, just kind of like unpleasantness to them to a certain degree. And like I say, I don't think the way this movie is put together on a technical level, it makes the performances seem muted because of the low audio. So, you know, I think this goes, all of these things kind of like make the performances seem worse than they actually are. Like I said, I don't think I'm not saying the acting's fantastic, but, you know, it's not maybe as bad. But there are elements here that don't help these actors kind of deliver roles here. And then the actual kind of movie itself, I think, becomes a very generic zombie movie. I mean, we have this kind of interesting VFX with this kind of creature that looks pretty cool and looks kind of alien and looks quite horrific. But then it turns into a zombie film because it's like, you know, this thing affects its victims and turns them into zombies. It's just like, man, your kind of unique selling point, this kind of creature, is kind of then sort of on the back burner, now we're dealing with zombies, which we see, you know, every other movie, let's be honest. So it's like, oh wow, it's kind of turned into a generic zombie film, with all these kind of technical problems. And, you know, the story is slight, but it's okay. But then it turned into, you know, it doesn't really have anything sort of special towards it. With kind of unlikable characters, you know, so it's it hasn't done itself any favours, I feel. Now, I don't think it's quite as bad as maybe some people would say, but its technical elements here should have been improved upon. It's really down to the behind the scenes, behind the camera kind of crew here. I think more than the in front of the camera problems with this film. So as it stands at the moment, I mean, I rate this one. Do you know? I'm going to give it a 4 out of 10, and that might actually seem generous considering when you look at some of the other scores of this film. But I do feel, like I said, I don't think the actors do necessarily a bad job. I mean, it's okay. The idea of the story is okay, and the VFX are good, but it's just it's let down and makes this a kind of substandard film overall. But it's not a terrible film, I don't think. There are things to kind of like enjoy if you just want to watch kind of gooey monsters and, you know, stripper type women kind of running around and being chased by various zombies and stuff. It's probably a little bit generous, to be honest with you, but I feel there are elements here that just push it up a little bit, and I think it kind of somewhat overlooked by some other issues. Anyway, have you seen this movie? Please do let me know what your thoughts are. Give me a comment and tell me. And I look forward to seeing you next time. So it's a 4 out of 10.